Everything you have been told about the AI war is based on a single lie. That lie is the belief that intelligence is a resource you can only buy with hardware. For the last 3 years, the entire global economy has been held hostage by a single equation: more chips equals more power. We have watched as Nvidia built a $3 trillion fortress out of silicon and electricity, convinced that the only way to reach the future was through brute force. But while the giants were busy building bigger engines, someone else was busy reinventing the fuel. This is the LogicMap briefing on the DeepSeek disruption and why the hardware monopoly is facing its first true existential threat. We are witnessing the beginning of the efficiency insurgency, and it is about to change the math of the entire world. To understand why this is a crisis, you first have to understand the Nvidia Trap. Since the release of ChatGPT, the world has been in a hardware arms race. The logic was simple: if you wanted to double your intelligence, you had to double your compute. This created an infinite feedback loop, where companies like Meta, Microsoft, and Google were forced to buy hundreds of thousands of Blackwell chips just to stay in the race. Nvidia was the only winner because they owned the toll bridge. They created a world where intelligence was expensive by design. They didn't just sell chips, they sold a philosophy that brute force was the only path to artificial general intelligence. Wall Street loved this philosophy because it meant that Nvidia's revenue had no ceiling. As long as we wanted smarter AI, we had to keep buying more metal. But in the shadows of this $3 trillion empire, a small team did something that the logic of Silicon Valley said was impossible. They released DeepSeek R1. On the surface, it looked like just another large language model, but the underlying math was a hand grenade thrown into the center of Nvidia's data centers. DeepSeek didn't win by being bigger. They won by being smarter with less. They proved that you could achieve frontier-level performance, matching the likes of GPT-4o and Claude 3.5, using a fraction of the training budget and, more importantly, a fraction of the hardware. This is where the logic shifts. If the goal of the AI race is intelligence, and DeepSeek proved you can get that intelligence without needing 100,000 GPUs, then the entire valuation of the hardware market is built on a foundation of waste. We are moving from the era of brute force to the era of algorithmic efficiency. In the 1900s, we moved from massive coal-burning steam engines to the internal combustion engine. It wasn't about which engine was bigger, it was about which one was more efficient with its energy. DeepSeek is the internal combustion engine of AI, and it has just made the steam engines of the last 3 years look like relics of the past. The reason this is a catastrophe for the status quo is the concept of inference costs. For a long time, the world focused on how much it cost to train a model. That was a one-time fee paid to Nvidia. But the real money is in inference, the cost of the model actually answering your questions every single day. DeepSeek's architecture, specifically their use of multi-head latent attention and mixture of experts, allows the model to run at a speed and a price point that makes the current leaders look like they are burning money for warmth. When intelligence becomes cheap, the hardware required to run it becomes a commodity rather than a luxury. Imagine you are a CEO who just spent $10 billion building a data center filled with Nvidia chips because you thought that was the only way to stay competitive. Suddenly, a model comes out that does the same work for 10% of the cost on hardware you already owned. Those $10 billion in chips are no longer an asset. They are a liability. They are stranded assets. This is the secret fear that is currently moving through the boardrooms of Santa Clara. The fear is not that someone will build a better chip. The fear is that software will become so efficient that the world simply won't need as many chips as Nvidia is planning to build. This isn't just a technical update, it is a geopolitical realignment. For years, the United States has used export controls to keep the most powerful chips out of the hands of competitors. The logic was that if you don't have the chips, you don't have the intelligence. But the efficiency insurgency has bypassed that wall. By focusing on algorithmic breakthroughs rather than hardware hoarding, players who were previously locked out of the race are now back at the front of the line. If you can do with 10 chips what your rival does with 100, the sanctions don't matter. The map of global power is being redrawn by code, not by silicon. We are entering the second phase of the AI war. The first phase was the land grab, where everyone bought as much territory as possible in the form of GPUs. The second phase is the optimization war. We are going to see a massive shift in investment from hardware to efficiency startups. We are going to see companies like Meta and Amazon desperately trying to implement the DeepSeek logic to lower their own massive electricity bills. The world is realizing that the bottleneck to the future isn't the number of transistors on a chip, it is the elegance of the math behind the model. Nvidia is not going to disappear overnight. They are still the kings of the infrastructure. But the myth of their infinite growth is dead. The 30-day rule we discussed before is more relevant now than it has ever been. Jensen Huang knows that if he cannot pivot from being a hardware provider to being an efficiency provider, he will be left behind by the very revolution he started. The logic of the world has changed. Brute force is out. Elegance is in. The question you have to ask yourself is this: if the cost of intelligence drops to near zero, who wins and who loses? The winners are the ones who can build the best software on the most efficient machines. The losers are the ones who built their entire future on the belief that intelligence would always be expensive. The map is shifting beneath our feet. The hardware monopoly is cracking, and the software insurgents are just getting started. Everything you thought you knew about the AI race was based on a lie. But now, the truth is out. The war isn't about who has the most chips. It's about who can do the most with the chips they already have. The era of waste is over. The era of the LogicMap has begun. Stay sharp. Stay mapped. We will see you on the next briefing.